Okay, well, thank you very much. And first, I'd like to thank you, Minister Kono, for being with us today, for your wonderful remarks. And I'd like to congratulate you on a very highly successful G7 meeting and the digital ministers meeting beforehand, which you chaired. So with your indulgence, I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about digital governance, AI governance, and maybe a little about cybersecurity. Starting with digital governance, as you mentioned, we have such different approaches developing around the world, US and Europe, and you have advanced this concept of data free flow with trust. And you have succeeded, I think, in getting the world to G7 to agree to create a new mechanism, which I think is going to have some support from the OECD, if I understood properly. And as I think about one of the pillars you've mentioned is around maintaining interoperability between systems, that we don't harmonize our systems, but we find ways to keep data flowing and build up trust. And I wonder if you could say a bit more how you think this will practically work so that we can actually develop over time that confidence.
Thank you. Yes, we have agreed to set up a new international framework. And this international body is to do a concrete project. And Japan has been proposing 2 projects up front. The first one is to create a global database of data transfer rules. EU has a EU rule, and each European member state has their own rules, and its laws, regulations, official guideline, official Q&A, and sometimes the judiciary has their own decisions, and it changes quite often. So if a Japanese SME wanted to do business in Europe, and if they wanted to find out exactly what they have to do to comply with European rule, it's very difficult. And if a big company may be able to hire a law firm to find out, but the SME cannot often afford to do that. So we are planning to set up a global database on data regulation and update constantly through API or something. So anyone who want to find out data rules can go to the database and find out. And that's number one. Number two, we would like to create a regulatory sandbox for emerging technologies. There are a lot of emerging technologies that are supposed to protect your privacy. We need to make sure this technology comply with GDPR or Japanese law or laws, regulation of whichever country. So we would like to create a sandbox and test our technology. And if it passes, all the member states would say, okay, this technology would make sure that it will comply with our laws and regulation. So that are the 2 things that we are proposing. And this international framework is, well, not for G7 only. We wanted to expand to like-minded country and the global south. So all those developing economy who wanted to do business with Europe or United States or Japan or whatever, they can be the member. They can be a member of this international framework and share the global database and participate in regulatory sandbox. So we would like to extend invitation to the global south. Right now, some dictatorships are trying to create their own data regime where the government could ask government to give information to the government. And they wanted to separate, internet used to be one, but now internet is often referred as splinternet. Different country has a different rule or build a wall around them. Or even metaverse, China is setting up different rules called Redverse. So we wanted to invite Global South to our data regime so that we can continue to have one internet, one data sphere, so people can do business easily and less worried about conforming different data regimes.
Thank you very much. Of course, it's great. It's a joy for me to be here in Tokyo again and in person, and always to collaborate with my colleague, Jerry Curtis. So I think we will tag team asking you questions,
Sure.
if you don't mind. Jerry.
It's a good idea. Well, Kono-san, thank you very much for your presentation. I want to ask you a little bit more about how you see the issue of AI for Japan. You know, there's enthusiasm and excitement all over the world about ChatGPT, about generative artificial intelligence, and while there's a lot of enthusiasm and there's also a lot of concern. It could be used for good, it could be used for ill. You made an important point in your talk about, unlike a lot of countries in Europe that are worried about the negative implications for employment by AI, Japan has kind of an opposite problem, which is that there are fewer and fewer people to work. And so I think I think you put it, you know, humans should do what only humans can do, but if a computer can do it, great, they can do it. But the question is, there's a need for government regulation about AI so that it is not used for bad, for evil, for bad things and is harmful. What is your thinking about what kind of regulation is needed in Japan, and how, you know, if Japan alone, you could regulate, but then this is kind of a porous situation. So how do you, what are you thinking about collaboration with the US and with other countries to regulate AI?
Thank you. Well, I think AI is a good friend for the Japanese. As I said, we are losing population very fast. The society is aging, so we definitely need assistance from artificial intelligence. So a lot of media start talking about risk. But yes, there are risks, but there are opportunities, and we need to go after the opportunity that our AI could provide. That's number one. And yes, there are risks. Right now, ChatGPT, if you put classified information, it will physically go out of Japan. So the government need to be very careful how we're going to use ChatGPT at this moment. We have been talking to OpenAI and Microsoft how we can deal the information or data set we are going to feed into ChatGPT. And it goes to the same for other kind of AI. And so how are we going to keep the privacy? How are we going to keep the secrecy of the information? That's number one. Number two, as I said, we need to be very careful about the misinformation, fake news. I mean, generative AI could easily come up with fake news, fake video, fake whatever. So we definitely need to distinguish what is authentic and what are the fake. With AI, there could be so much fake information. So the next generation of AI will start out with data set with fake information. And I mean, from the beginning, it could be contaminated. So we need to be very careful about misinformation and the fake news. And then I think we definitely need to coordinate regulation with other like-minded democracies. I think we need to have same or very similar regulation among the like-minded country, meaning democracy. We need to be very careful, and we need to use probably watermark or some technology so you can tell what is generated by AI, what are human creation and things like that. Well, eventually, human creation will probably be assisted by some kind of AI technology, so there may not be 100% human creation in the future, but we need to be able to tell the difference of that. And the language is important, so that's probably the government and the private sector here in Japan need to work together. And then lastly, education. Even my son in college paying, 2,400 yen to subscribe for GPT-4 or whatever. So we probably need to change the way we educate children. I mean, if you look at the college exam here, how much do you have to, memorize those things? But many of the things that on exam, you can simply ask Siri, or you can ask ChatGPT, and they can give you answer. So we'll probably need a different skill set for the next generation. So it's not the regulation, but you need to pay big attention to how you're going to educate children in the future.
No, I just wanted to kind of a follow-up, but it's also a different subject. Japan has lots of restrictions about privacy laws and a very intense public concern about protecting their privacy, which raises all kinds of issues for digitalization. How do you deal with that?
Yes, there are two concerns, quite opposite. One is there are always questions about my number system, or should I get my number card? Will that violate my privacy kind of question? And I've been talking to people that my number system is really decentralized, and there are less to worry about. And on the other hand, the current regulation is too rigid. So when they are trying to do some clinical trials, it'll be very difficult to do that in Japan, or it would take much longer time than the other countries. So we need to relax regulation for anonymous data set kind of thing. So we really need to sit down and decide where we want to go from here, and how much or what kind of data protection or privacy protection we would like to have. So that's something we really need to sit down and talk about logic. But right now it's more not evidence-based. It's more like episode-based discussion about the privacy. So we need to bring in a lot of evidence, and we need to talk about privacy protection based on evidence.
Let me, if I may, take you back to AI for another minute. It's such a exciting and engaging conversation at our university, and it's cutting across all fields. I mean, at the School of International Affairs, we're talking about AI and democracy. We're talking about AI and ethics. We're talking building out AI systems. So it's really cutting across the university. And a lot of governance dimensions are surfacing. Where do you need to have a human intervention for certain kinds of decisions? And interestingly, technologists in the US have been calling on Congress to say, you need to regulate. So you're seeing technologists saying, here's an area we should, what kind of pause, what kind of intervention? But the private sector is where the expertise really is, and so and the universities, so working with the government becomes crucial. Now, I know Japan, you've set up an AI strategy council. Could you say a little bit more about how you imagine working with the private sector and universities?
Well, thank you. AI is sort of a big chunk of digital transformation, and our digital agency need to pay attention to AI. So we are trying to hire AI engineers at the digital agency, but there's a restriction. I cannot pay more than my vice minister, which is nothing in IT field. So it'll be very difficult to hire someone for full time. So what I'm doing is I'm offering, would you work for me 2 days a week? You can do anything the rest of the week. And I'm still having problem getting good AI engineers. So it is very difficult. And private sector is really moving forward, and if you're in the government, you may not be able to keep the pace with the private sector. So you definitely need to have people coming in from the private sector, work for the government, and then go back to the private sector and get someone else working for the government. So Kasumigaseki, or the Japanese bureaucratic system, is probably not good at this, going around things between the private sector and the government. So the digital agency is something new in the Japanese government. We are trying to get as many people from the private sector and sending them back to the private sector after a certain time. So if we can be successful in this attempt, other ministry may be able to follow that, and that would change the whole Kasumigaseki culture, and it's a big experiment right now.
Well, so reform to deal with this problem, for example, of being able to hire people and paying them a competitive salary, requires reform. What it means is a reform that he can be paid more than the vice minister. So if you don't make those kinds of reforms in the structure and and change the Kasumigaseki culture, then you're kind of up against a wall all the time. Do you see much? I've been around Japan a long time. There's a lot of talk of reform. Always has been a lot of talk of reform. A lot of it is talk. From your vantage point now as digital minister, where do you think the most important reforms are that need to be made to make your job easier and to make things better for Japan?
Well, as you introduced me, I'm also in charge of a bureaucratic reform, and we see Kasumigaseki system is crumbling. We are no longer able to attract the cream of the cream. the application for each ministry, the number is going down and down, and less young people are applying for the ministry. So we really need to change the way we work in Kasumigaseki and the culture of the bureaucracy to attract good people. And probably next generation, you're not gonna join the government right after you graduate from the college, and you stay with the government until your retirement age. I think that's gonna be the past. So in the next generation, we keep hiring the good people out of the private sector. And if they do something in the government, if they are satisfied, they may go back to the private sector, but someone else will be joining the government. So I think that's what we are looking at. So the new people will come in with new technology, new ideas, new maybe management skill and all those things. So we need to, the Kasumigaseki or the government need to keep up with the private sector, because private sector will be changing so fast. And if the government doesn't change as fast as the private sector, then it would be a big shackle to the society. So the government need to change. And
are you optimistic?
Well, if you come see the digital agency, you see it's different from the other ministry. Sure. So 5 years from now, is Ministry of Finance changing, or is digital agency becoming something like the old ministry? So the next 5 years will decide which way we go.
Well, you know, I was quite encouraged when I saw Japan's cyber strategy. And you have not only committed to increase defense spending substantially, but to create a ambitious cyber workforce. And, you know, cyber workforce, in my view, doesn't, you know, these don't have to be PhDs. You can train people at different levels to be really very effective if you're working with the private sector. So I wonder how your thinking also works on the cybersecurity dimension of that workforce creation.
For cybersecurity, you need to have a high peak, but you need to have a broad base, and we need to have both. But if you look at human resources, I think we need to produce more and more out of universities. Compared to the other countries, the Japanese college or Japanese universities produce less of those talent. So I think we need to change the higher education according to digital transformation.
Well, thank you so much. I wish we had more time. Please know that you have an open invitation at Columbia University, and we are eager to have you back as digital minister or in any future role. So thank you for being with us today. It's been a real pleasure for all of us.
Thank you.
パネリストの皆様、ありがとうございました。